Let me pray first. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Some of you know me, and some of you I've never met before. So I thought I'd just start with an introduction because your pastor is going to get tired sometimes, and he's going to need people up here besides himself. Some of you have heard my husband Jonathan preach before. And so I just thought I'd give a little introduction to start. So we first came, I have to find my first slide here. So we first came to Taiwan in 2005. Actually, my husband first came in 2005, and he spent a whole year here when he was in graduate school. And I was also in graduate school at the time, so I could not come for a whole year. So I just came for 6 months. So I came in January of 2006, and some of you I met at that time. And that's when we really fell in love with Taiwan. And then we kept thinking, like, is there a way we can go? And our coworker, John McCall, who some of you might have also met, really encouraged us to apply with the Presbyterian Church USA. But it was some time before we could apply, and I had our first child, and then so there were a lot of details to work out first. At around the time I joined Jonathan, that in 2006 in January, a small group of very committed elders, some of whom are in the audience today, Su Jiang Lao right there, they approached Jonathan and me saying they wanted to start an English ministry. So when Jonathan and I teamed up with this small group of elders, musicians, and there was also a seminary student involved who had very, very excellent English, when we started this SLP-CEM back in 2006, we could only dream about what the church would become. And I'm so encouraged to see how this congregation has flourished. And this is, we were in charge for like a few months, so it's not about us. The people who came after us are the ones who really grew this congregation. Since I usually help with the children's ministry here, I've also loved seeing how families grow and seeing these kids, some of whom I have known since they were babies, grow up year by year and also grow in their faith. Actually, this went too far, but anyway, the previous slide is just our website on the PCUSA. And apparently we need a better photo because the resolution is really bad. But during the whole pandemic, we didn't go back to the US, so we didn't do like the formal photo that's supposed to go on our website. Anyway. So in 2009, by God's grace, Jonathan and I were able to come to Taiwan as missionaries serving through the Presbyterian Church USA. And when we came, our eldest son was just 15 months old. Now he's 15. So it was a long time ago. And our twins, Eva and Eli, so our oldest is Sam. He's not here today, but then our twins were born here in Taipei in 2010. So Jonathan is a professor at Taiwan Seminary, and here he is with some of his students and coworkers. In fact, your pastor was one of my husband's students a very, very long time ago. Well, okay, maybe it wasn't that long ago, because you're really young, so... my own work in Taiwan has been a lot of different things, but I also see my teaching as really important and helping with this ministry, with children's ministry, and in other Taipei churches. So here are some of my students. Some of them you might recognize, and I think there are more of my students here, some of whom are not in Taiwan anymore. Very sad, they went away. But and then. We're also involved in involved in various ways with the General Assembly Office for the PCT. And I've become involved in what's called the Taiwan Ecumenical Forum, it works with Taiwan's ecumenical partners around the world to address the pressing issue of Taiwan's international isolation and to draw attention to the effects of the ongoing geopolitical tensions that we all know about. And I just thought I would talk a little bit about our life as missionaries, because we do a lot of back and forth. Although the COVID pandemic, we didn't do a lot of back and forth. So we've been back the last 2 summers. And here you can see this is a recent church visit that my husband did in North Carolina. Our son, Eli, is still with him in the U.S., and here he's helping run the PowerPoint for that presentation. Okay, let's see. So the way that when we go back to the U.S., it also helps us reconnect with family, which is really, really important for us. And even though we've lived in Taiwan a really long time, I feel like my kids still have a good connection with their grandparents and their aunts and uncles and their cousins. But this is super important. It's not like, George Leslie McKay, I think he went back to Canada maybe twice in his 30 years of serving in Taiwan, because he had to come on a boat and he was seasick the whole time. I mean, I would have given up, really, because I also get really seasick. But the point is that we do need to go back, and actually our time is supposed to be spent about 80% in our country of service and 20% in Taiwan. Now that wasn't the case during COVID, obviously, because the situation in the U.S. was not good, and coming back here, we would have had a quarantine a really long time with our kids, and that just was not appealing at all. So anyway, this is just a brief introduction to the Seitz family. And now let's turn to today's gospel reading from Matthew chapter 16. So, what does it say? The disciples state that people are saying that other figures besides Jesus, like John the Baptist, or prophets, like Elijah or Jeremiah, are the Son of God. It's not Jesus. But when Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter is the only one to speak out, and he gives the right answer. "You are the Messiah," he says. Jesus asserts that this was revealed to Simon Peter by God, not by people. And then in this passage, Jesus renames Simon Peter, kind of like giving him a nickname. His new name is to be Peter, the rock. And Jesus tells him he will build his church upon this rock. This passage actually is one of the most debated passages in the New Testament, partly because, based on the Greek words for stone, which is petros, and rock, which is petra, that Jesus used in this passage, and comparing them to his usage of these words in other New Testament passages. So different interpretations lead to different conclusions about what entity Jesus was actually saying he would build the church on. There are a number of possibilities, but the main ones are the following: that he would build the church on 1, Christ himself; 2, his teachings; 3, Peter's naming of Jesus as the Messiah, his confession of faith here; or 4, Peter himself. So part of the controversy has to do with the fact that the Catholic Church uses this passage to say that Peter was the first pope. Since I'm not a New Testament scholar, nor have I ever studied Greek, I left that to my husband in seminary, and I was not called to seminary myself. I can't give a definitive answer, and I don't want to get bogged down in all these debates, which possibly can't be resolved in any satisfactory way anyway. But instead, I'd like to focus today on Peter's remarkable confession of faith in this passage. As the passage goes on, Jesus tells Peter he will give him the keys of the kingdom. You see in this picture today, he's shown with the keys there. Jesus is recognizing Peter as a teaching authority and as a leader. As I just mentioned, this is why the Catholic Church claims that Peter was the first pope. And that's where all the controversy comes in that we're not going to delve into today. Then, as Jesus often does in the gospel accounts, he ends this this passage by telling the disciples not to tell anyone that he is the Messiah. It's not completely clear why he tells them to keep this a secret, except that it was not yet the right time for it to be revealed, and that as his fame spread, he would eventually be tried and crucified, and so he needed to complete his work on earth before that would happen. Sometimes I also think, like, if somebody tells you a secret and tells you not to tell anybody, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to go tell people about it, right? So I don't know, maybe there's some of that here too. He knew people would tell other people about him. So what do we know about Peter that can help us understand and reflect on today's reading? Peter was married and he owned a home in Capernaum. And it was in this home that Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law of her illness. You might remember that event in the Bible. Peter was the son of a fisherman, and he and his brother Andrew were also fishermen. He and Andrew accepted Jesus' invitation to serve as disciples, setting down their nets when Jesus tells them he will teach them to fish for people instead of fish. Fishing was really hard work. It's not the fishing I did when I was a kid, going with my dad, using a fishing pole. They had really heavy nets that they cast from the shore or from the boat, and they had to pull them in, sometimes full of fish, sometimes not, rowing the boats, and they had to put in very long hours, and sometimes they had very little to show for it, depending on whether there were a lot of fish or not. And because fishing was the occupation of many of his disciples, Jesus often used fishing as an analogy to illustrate the points that he wanted to make. And it may be that the hard work of fishing prepared Peter well for the hard work of becoming a disciple of Jesus. Peter is the most frequently mentioned disciple in the Gospels. As I already mentioned, and as we see quite clearly in today's reading, he was definitely a leader among the disciples. He was often a spokesman for them. And in today's passage, he's the only one who spoke out. He was in Jesus' inner circle, along with James and John. So, in answering that Jesus was the Messiah, he not only gave the right answer, but he also risked persecution, and he could have been stoned to death for committing blasphemy according to the law. Frederick Buechner was an American Presbyterian pastor and a theologian and a writer, and he died just last year. He says this about Peter in Matthew 16. There's not a lot you can do to change a rock or crack it or get under its skin, and barring earthquakes, you can depend on it about as much as you can depend on anything. So Jesus called him the rock, and it stuck with him the rest of his life. Peter, the rock. He could stop fishing for fish, Jesus told him. He'd been promoted. From there on out, people were to be his business. Now he could start fishing for them. In reflecting on today's gospel reading and reading this passage by Buechner, I started thinking about rocks. Before I moved to Taiwan, I never did much hiking. Where I grew up in Ohio, we had a lot of hills, but no mountains. The only place I went hiking in the U.S. Was when I was a child, and we went to the Northeast, and we spent time in the White Mountains, which are really beautiful and really high mountains. And we would go there in the summer because I went to a camp. But Taiwan is so mountainous and full of rocks, both small and large, that I've become a big fan of hiking in the past few years, really. Now that my kids are bigger and they can go with me, because my husband doesn't like hiking. So I go usually with my daughter, Eva. And also the males in our family are really afraid of heights. So that they get up to a certain point and then they're kind of like, no, I'm good. I'm going back down. So we like to hike and climb up on rocks, and Eva likes to climb trees too. And we were just in my parents' yard in Ohio. They have these really big oak trees. And I went out and she was up in the tree. I said, what are you doing? Be careful. Come down, please. Even in a big city like Taipei, you don't have to go far to find a nice place to hike. So can anyone guess where I took this selfie with Eva? Nope. It's Jinmianshan. Really steep. Going up the mountain, we had no problem. Eva's not afraid of heights at all. But even as we were climbing up the steep hillside, we began to realize that we were going to have to go back down it. And we began to feel a little bit afraid. Nonetheless, we enjoyed resting against this big boulder on the way up and enjoyed seeing the beautiful scenery at the top. When we came back down, however, rather than holding onto this rope that you see, that's held onto the rock by metal stakes, we felt more secure scooting down while sort of sitting down, feeling that firm rock beneath us. Has anybody here been to Jinmianshan? No. Maybe it can be a field trip for the church, but it's really steep, so I'm not sure about that. But if the path had been any more steep than it was, we would have had to hang onto the rope, I think. But in this case, my daughter and I agreed that we felt more comfortable putting our trust in the rock than in this white rope. The rope attached to the metal stakes was likely quite secure, but following the path of the rock felt more safer in some ways for us. In a sense, our faith in God, is that better? A little further away, sorry. Yeah, there's some, is that okay? Better? Okay. In a sense, our faith in God can be like trusting in this foundation of rock beneath us. Leaders like Peter can help us along our path. But as disciples of Jesus, in the end, we also need to trust that with God's help, we can navigate the path while allowing the firm rock to support us and hold us. And like Peter, we can be brave and outspoken in our witness for Christ. Does this mean we will never doubt? Does this mean we will never fear? No, it absolutely does not. We know that Peter doubted. He left his fishing boat and started to walk on the water towards Jesus. And then he became afraid and he needed Jesus to pull him up out of the water. We're also like this, and we need to ask for Jesus to help us. I find that I often begin to doubt, but then I have some reminder of God's love for me. For me, it's usually through love shown to me by another person. But it could be revealed to us through prayer or through our dreams or even through visions we might have. In reflecting on today's reading, I began to think about exactly how we can witness for Christ like Peter did. And here are some of the main ones I came up with, but I invite you to reflect on this and think of others. So first of all, and I put this one in bold, you need to nurture your own relationship with God. Why is this one in bold? Because if we don't put Christ first in our lives and feel Christ's love, how can we show it to others? So it's really, really important that you figure out what helps you to connect with God. Is it through reading the Bible? Is it through silent prayer? Is it through fellowship with other people? Is it through retreat and solitude? Is it by spending time in nature, like for me? What helps you to talk to God and invite the Holy Spirit to work in your heart and direct you? Okay, so another one, pray for people who don't yet know Christ. And I think most Christians in Taiwan do this on a regular basis. Another one is to invite family and friends to church. This is an obvious one, but maybe something even that I don't do enough of, even though I'm a missionary. By inviting people to church, you can give them a taste of the spiritual food that only Christ can provide. So another one is to show Christ's love by caring for others, both in our everyday lives and through church-sponsored mission projects. And I see EM is doing a lot more of these lately, and it makes me really happy. Like you're cooking for the homeless today at 2 p.m. These are really good projects. And in this way, we can make Christ's love visible and tangible in a world of people who are hurting and broken. So these are probably things you already know, but sometimes I find it helps to remind ourselves now and again of what we Christians are called to do and how we're called to be. And may we remember the faith of Peter, the rock, as we follow Christ, the cornerstone of our faith. Amen.